The land stretching from the Ural Mountains all the way to the Pacific Ocean holds thousands of secrets. But the greatest mystery concerns those who once called these vast expanses home. Looking at the pristine forests and mighty rivers of Siberia, it is easy to believe that this place has always been wild and uninhabited. It seems as though human footsteps are a recent addition here. But this is merely an illusion, a green veil thrown by time over the ruins of a great past. Strangely, ancient Arab sages and travelers, who compiled the first detailed maps of the world, labeled these territories with the haunting term, the devastated land. What did they know that we have forgotten? Why did they speak not of a wild land, but specifically of a devastated one, implying that life once thrived here before being violently extinguished? This catastrophe explains the physical disappearance of the ancient culture, but it does not explain the conspiracy of silence that surrounds these facts today. Despite the presence of megaliths, chemical artifacts, and the ancient idol, official science prefers to ignore the Ural findings. Admitting that the cradle of civilization might have been in Siberia would require a complete rewriting of history textbooks, and an admission that many academic dogmas are untenable. It is easier to declare grand ruins a trick of nature than to rewrite the history of humanity. However, the stones continue to silently keep their secret, waiting for those willing to look beneath their feet and ask uncomfortable questions, discovering the genuine, forgotten past of this land. The answers begin to emerge if we stop relying solely on dusty textbooks and learn to notice the inconsistencies in the landscape around us. To the casual observer, the Urals are simply majestic mountains. However, here and there, emerging from beneath centuries-old layers of soil and taiga moss, are outlines that cannot be dismissed as a whimsical game of nature. We are faced with colossal structures, such as Black Sopka or Mount Rotak, reaching heights of 700 meters or more. They tower over the forest like eternal sentinels. Official geology offers a convenient explanation. These are natural formations, the result of frost, wind, and water eroding the stone over millennia. But one only needs to get closer for this tidy theory of chaotic natural processes to crumble into dust. There is simply too much mathematically precise accuracy in these rocks. Instead of shapeless boulders, we see constructions composed of massive megalithic blocks of granite, syenite, and basalt. These blocks possess a strikingly regular shape, with flat facets and sharp, almost perfect right angles. In some places, cuts remain that are so smooth it looks as if a giant tool sliced through the hardest rock without meeting any resistance. These are clear signs of mechanical processing, evidence of technology that seems out of place in the ancient world. The stones do not merely lie atop one another. They are fitted together with a mastery that rules out chance, speaking of a civilization capable of managing colossal resources. If the origin of the shapes can still be debated, the chemical composition of the findings leaves even the most hardened skeptics at a dead end. During research on one of these pyramidal peaks, known as Mitige, a strange coating was discovered on the surface of the giant blocks, a thin layer of black, glossy resin. Laboratory analysis showed that this was not lichen or accidental residue, but an artificially applied compound. But the real sensation was the age of this substance. Radiocarbon dating placed it at 30,000 years old. This is the deep Paleolithic era, the Ice Age, when, according to accepted chronology, humans were supposed to be huddling in caves with primitive scrapers. However, the find in the Urals testifies to the existence of advanced chemical production in those times. Moreover, this coating had a specific functional purpose. Specialists believe the resin could have served as a perfect reflector, turning the faces of the pyramids into giant mirrors for transmitting light signals over vast distances, a kind of ancient navigation or communication system. In other places, on cone-shaped structures, this same compound was used as a super-strong binding material, working at the molecular level to turn the masonry into a monolith. Attempts by modern scientists to recreate this recipe have failed, which speaks to the highest level of materials science possessed by these ancient masters. The scale of this work begs a logical question. Who was capable of moving multi-ton blocks and erecting cyclopean walls? Here, ancient legends preserved in the memory of indigenous peoples come to our aid. The legends tell of a race of giants who lived here long before the arrival of modern man. These were beings of incredible height, possessing immense strength and wisdom, who lived for thousands of years. Interestingly, such references are not found only in folklore. The famous Arab traveler Ibn Fadlan, who visited these lands in the 10th century, left records of meeting a man of gigantic stature, which lends these myths a frightening credibility. If we accept the existence of such builders, the puzzle of moving the megaliths solves itself. What is an immovable boulder to us, requiring cranes and hydraulics, would have been a standard building block for a creature 15 meters tall. They didn't need complex machinery, only their own physical power. The absence of mass graves for these beings is also explained by their incredible longevity, as mentioned in the legends. But legends in rocks are one thing. A material object that can be dated and studied in a museum is quite another, and such an artifact exists. At the end of the 19th century, in the Shigir peat bog, gold miners pulled a huge wooden statue covered in complex ornaments from the depths. The Big Shigir Idol, as it was later named, became a true shock to science. Radiocarbon analysis showed its age exceeds 9,500 years. It is twice as old as the Egyptian pyramids and predates any known civilizations of the Middle East. The complex system of symbols and faces carved into the idol testifies that its creators possessed a developed culture, mythology, and perhaps proto-writing. This is irrefutable proof that a highly advanced civilization flourished in the Urals at a time when Europe was still in the Stone Age. Where did this powerful world vanish? Why do only ruins and encrypted idols remain? The answer likely lies in a global catastrophe of planetary scale. Ancient texts and geological data point to an event, whether the impact of a celestial body or a pole shift, that triggered a giant tsunami and tectonic shifts. Flourishing cities were instantly destroyed, buried under layers of silt and clay, and the survivors were thrown back in development by thousands of years, retaining only vague memories of a golden age. It was this event that turned a densely populated region into the very devastated land recorded by Arab cartographers. For the ordinary traveler deciding to walk the tourist trails of the Urals, these places appear as a majestic kingdom of wild nature. Ancient spruce trees, turbulent rivers, and, of course, the mountains. Old, battered by time, covered in lichen and snow. But as soon as a person with critical thinking and a keen eye steps off the beaten path and ventures deeper into the wilderness, the familiar picture of the world begins to relentlessly transform. The Urals reveal their true face, and this face stuns the imagination with colossal structures, the creation of which is impossible to imagine without the participation of a highly developed mind and immense technical capabilities. In the very heart of the taiga, where geological expeditions rarely venture, silent witnesses of past eras stand before researchers. These are grand elevations, which in scientific circles are simply called mountains or hills, but their appearance evokes a persistent sense of artificiality. Striking examples are objects like Black Sopka or Mount Rotak. Their height reaches, and sometimes exceeds, 700 meters. They tower over the sea of forest like eternal sentinels guarding the peace of ancient secrets. Official science offers a very convenient and, at first glance, logical explanation. We are looking at nothing more than a whimsical game of nature, the result of thousands of years of weathering, erosion, and tectonic activity. Geologists convince us that frost, gale force winds, and streams of water can act as sculptors, carving forms from the rock mass that the human eye mistakenly accepts as man-made objects. According to this version, the giant stone blocks that make up these mountains are merely natural remnants, the result of rock cracking under temperature changes. However, this tidy theory begins to crumble before our eyes the moment one approaches the foot of these giants and examines their structure up close. There is too much unnatural, mathematically precise accuracy in these so-called natural formations, a precision completely uncharacteristic of chaotic natural forces. Instead of a disorderly pile of stones, which one would expect from a crumbling mountain, we see ordered constructions. They consist of huge megalithic blocks made of the hardest rocks, granite, syenite, and basalt. Many of these blocks have a shockingly regular geometric shape. We observe perfectly flat facets, even surfaces as if polished by a giant machine, and clear, practically flawless right angles. In the wild, right angles are extremely rare, and certainly not on such a scale or in such concentration on a single object. In some places on these stones, cuts are visible that are so smooth and even that it creates the impression that a giant red-hot knife or laser cutter passed through the stone, meeting no resistance from the material. Such a mark cannot be explained by wind, water, or frost weathering. Erosion always acts chaotically, smoothing corners and creating rounded, irregular shapes. Here, we see the triumph of geometry and engineering calculation. These megaliths are found everywhere if one simply looks carefully at the slopes and peaks, and their clearly artificial origin raises no doubts in those who have encountered modern industrial construction. These are not just shards of rock that have fallen onto each other. These are fragments of ancient Cyclopean structures, the walls of which were laid using polygonal masonry. Blocks weighing hundreds of tons are fitted to each other with such precision that it is sometimes impossible to slide a knife blade between them. We are facing clear signs of mechanical processing, evidence of technologies that seem impossible for the level of development attributed to the ancient world. Who, and more importantly, with what, could process the hardest mountain rocks with such ease and precision? In official history, there is not a single mention of peoples inhabiting the Urals who possessed such industrial capacities. On the contrary, we are told that these lands were wild and practically uninhabited. But the stones lying before us say otherwise. They literally scream of a civilization capable of erecting structures requiring incredible skills in logistics, engineering, and resource management. So what towers over the Ural Taiga? A unique natural phenomenon with no analogs in the world? Or the legacy of a highly developed culture unknown to us? If we assume this is the work of intelligent beings, the scale of their activity is staggering. These were not just dwellings or temples, they were complexes of industrial or defensive significance, built to last for ages. The shape of these objects, their orientation to the cardinal points, and the quality of the material processing force a reconsideration of everything we know about the past of this region. However, visual inspection and geometric correctness are only the tip of the iceberg. The answer to the question of the purpose of these objects and the level of development of their builders turned out to be much deeper than one could assume by looking only at the shape of the stones. It was hidden in the very composition of the surface of these megaliths. During detailed research on some blocks, specialists discovered something that finally dispels the myth of the natural origin of these giants and points to their absolutely fantastic technical equipment, transporting us from the supposed Stone Age straight into an era of high technology. The answer to what these stone giants are and who created them turned out to be far more startling than the boldest hypotheses of amateur archaeologists. The solution was hidden not in the shape of the stones themselves, but in what covered their surface. During a detailed expedition to one of the peaks of the Ural Range, known among the local population as Mitigay, researchers encountered a phenomenon that went beyond the scope of any known natural geological process. Upon closer examination, it turned out that specific sides of the giant megalithic blocks were covered with a thin but extremely durable layer of an unknown substance resembling black resin. Skeptics might suggest that these are merely traces of ancient fires, a specific lichen growth, or rock oxidation. However, this coating was applied in an even, deliberate layer and possessed a strange, glossy shine completely uncharacteristic of organic matter or soot. When samples of this mysterious substance were carefully collected and sent for laboratory analysis, the results produced a bombshell effect in specialist circles. Radiocarbon dating, a method considered one of the most reliable in modern science, showed that the age of this organic resin is at least 30,000 years. To realize the scale of this figure, one must recall school history lessons. 30,000 years ago is the deep Upper Paleolithic, the harsh Ice Age. According to official chronology, our ancestors at this time were primitive hunters and gatherers fighting for survival, living in caves or hide huts, and struggling to fashion the simplest stone scrapers. What chemistry, what production of complex polymers can we speak of? But the find in the Urals completely destroys this primitive picture. It testifies that already in those immemorial times, a civilization existed in this territory that mastered the most complex technologies of chemical synthesis. But the most intriguing question was the purpose of this substance. During the research, two main hypotheses were born, and each points to the high technical level of the ancient builders. The first version states that the resin performed the function of an ideal optical reflector. The smooth granite facets covered with it turned into giant mirrors, capable of reflecting sunlight or perhaps other types of radiation. If one imagines an entire network of such pyramids, whose mirror surfaces caught and redirected signals, then we are looking at the remains of a grandiose communication or navigation system. With the help of such light beacons, information could be transmitted over hundreds of kilometers, coordinating actions over the vast territories of the Urals and Siberia. These mountains were not just cult structures, but high-tech, functional objects, a kind of technical infrastructure of the ancient world. The second function of this substance was revealed when studying other megalithic objects, specifically cone-shaped constructions. Here, the same resin was used in a different capacity, as a super-strong binding material, a kind of prehistoric superglue or cement. Analysis of the compound structure showed an incredible thing. The foundation of the structures was often a natural rock outcrop, but the superstructures were composed of separate blocks held together by this compound. It created such a strong bond at the molecular level that the construction became practically monolithic. The seam turned out to be stronger than the stone itself. It is thanks to this unique glue that ancient buildings were able to survive 30,000 years of erosion, temperature changes, and the harsh Ural climate, preserving their shape to this day. It is also striking that attempts by modern scientists to recreate the exact chemical composition of this resin have failed. Despite all the achievements of our civilization in the fields of nanotechnology and organic chemistry, we cannot repeat the recipe used by unknown masters in the glacial epoch. This suggests that their level of knowledge in materials science was incredibly high, and possibly based on principles completely different from our science. We have encountered a technology that was not just ahead of its time, it seems alien to the familiar history of humanity. The presence of such technologies, long-distance communication systems, and super-strong construction mixtures conclusively proves the existence of an advanced civilization. But these discoveries give rise to a new, even more complex question. Chemistry and optics are the sphere of intellect. However, to erect such monuments, incredible physical force was also required. Who could lift these multi-ton boulders to the mountain peaks? They had the technology, but what was their physical nature? The answer to this question is frightening in its fantastical nature. yet it has been preserved in sources that science turns to extremely rarely, in ancient legends that we are used to considering fiction, but which now acquire a frightening realism. The technological level of the ancient builders of the Urals, who possessed the secrets of complex chemistry and geopolymer concrete, undoubtedly leaves modern academic science at an impasse. However, the solution to their incredible capabilities may lie not only in the realm of lost mechanisms, lasers, or anti-gravity devices, but in the very physical nature of those who created these mechanisms. When engineering logic is powerless to explain how multi-ton boulders were lifted to mountain peaks without the use of heavy machinery, the collective memory of the people comes to the rescue. It is here, among the gray-haired elders of the Urals, passed down from generation to generation, from father to son, that legends survive. Stories that seem like fantastic fairy tales to the modern city dweller, but in the light of recent geological discoveries, acquire a frightening credibility. These legends, the age of which significantly exceeds any written chronicles, tell of times when the masters of this land were not ordinary people, but a race of giants. Ancient tales say that many thousands of years ago, the vast expanses from the stone belt to the ocean were inhabited by a tribe of beings of unusually tall stature, reaching the height of a mature tree. According to the legends, these were not isolated genetic anomalies, but an entire flourishing civilization uniting several nations of giants. Folk memory describes them not as wild, bloodthirsty monsters from children's horror stories, but as wise and powerful guardians of the earth. They possessed knowledge inaccessible to the common man, understood the secret language of nature, knew how to control the elements, and lived incredibly long lives. Sometimes their age spanned thousands of years, allowing them to accumulate colossal experience and pass it on without distortion. For a long time, these stories were perceived by ethnographers purely as metaphorical folklore. However, there are amazing testimonies left in authoritative written sources that force us to look at the legends from a different angle. One of the most striking documents is the notes of the famous Arab historian, diplomat, and traveler Ahmad ibn Fadlan. Living in the 10th century, he was a man of science and civil service, not a collector of tall tales. In his reports on his journey to the lands of Volga, Bulgaria, and further north, he described in dry detail, as befits an official, an encounter with a man whose height went beyond the bounds of the reasonable. Ibn Fadlan claimed that he did not just see the giant from afar, but had the opportunity to observe him up close and even hear his speech. Testimony of this level, coming from an educated man of his era, is difficult to dismiss as hallucination or fiction. If we accept the hypothesis of the existence of a race of giants as a working theory, then many insoluble puzzles of the Ural megaliths suddenly find a simple and elegant physical explanation. What is an immovable granite block weighing 50 or 100 tons for us, people of average height, would be equivalent to a standard building brick or cinder block for a creature 10 to 15 meters tall? In this paradigm, there is no need to search for traces of giant cranes, levitation devices, or complex hydraulics, which archaeologists still cannot find. Possessing incredible muscle mass and a corresponding skeleton, these beings could easily carry, lift, and perfectly lay stone boulders using only their physical strength and the simplest levers. The scale of their buildings was absolutely commensurate with their own height and domestic needs. Where we, craning our necks, see a cyclopean fortress wall, they perhaps erected a simple fence for livestock. Where we look with awe at a colossal pyramid, for them, it might have been an ordinary technical structure or an observation post. Even the skeptic's argument regarding the absence of mass graves of giants finds a logical explanation within the legend itself. If these beings lived for several thousand years, as the legends claim, then the turnover of generations occurred extremely rarely. Consequently, there were disproportionately fewer deaths than in human society. Necropolises of giants cannot be extensive by definition, and isolated burials over tens of thousands of years could have been destroyed by natural cataclysms or hidden in inaccessible mountain caves where the foot of a modern researcher has not stepped. Thus, the legends of giants fit perfectly into the picture painted for us by the silent stones of the Urals. This theory explains the gigantism in construction, the absence of traces of machine technology, and even the demographic features of the ancient population. However, for the strict scientific world, oral traditions and the notes of a medieval Arab will always remain in the category of mythology. Skeptics are not satisfied with words. They need something that can be measured, weighed, and subjected to analysis in a laboratory. They need an ironclad argument. And the irony of fate lies in the fact that such an argument actually exists. Deep in the Ural earth lies not just a beautiful fairy tale, but a real, tangible artifact. This is material proof that not only confirms the presence of an ancient high culture here, but also proves that it is much, much older than the Egyptian pharaohs and all ancient civilizations known to us. Legends and tales, however thrilling they may be, often remain merely echoes of folklore for strict academic science, lacking evidentiary power. Scientists are accustomed to believing facts, measurable quantities, and radiocarbon dates, not stories about giants who once lived. However, at the end of the 19th century, the Ural land, as if tired of skepticism and distrust, revealed to the world an artifact that became not just a museum treasure, but a real challenge to the entire official historical chronology. This story began not in the silence of university libraries, but in the harsh conditions of industrial mining, when human thirst for gold led to a discovery whose value exceeds any precious metal. In 1890, in the territory of the Shigir peat bog, located northwest of Yekaterinburg, gold miners were conducting active excavations. Peat, as is known, is a unique natural preservative. Thanks to the lack of oxygen access and a specific acidic environment, organic matter does not decompose in it for millennia. It was from this dark, swampy depth that workers began to extract strange fragments of processed wood. When the find was handed over to specialists and a single composition was assembled from the scattered parts, a huge statue carved from a solid trunk of larch appeared before the astonished researchers. In its assembled form, this monument, known today as the Big Shigir Idol, reached a height of 5 meters and 30 centimeters, which is comparable to the height of a 2-story house. But the colossal dimensions were not the main mystery of this object. The entire surface of the wooden body of the idol was covered with a complex, rhythmic, geometric ornament. It was crowned by a volumetric head with a dispassionate, mesmerizing face, and along the entire length of the trunk, several more flat faces were carved. Faces, each crowning a separate figure inscribed in the general array. All these faces are different. They look at us from the depths of centuries, with frightening expressiveness. These are not the chaotic notches of a savage trying to pass the time by a fire. This is a coherent system of symbols, a complex work of art carrying a deep semantic subtext. Researchers are still arguing about the meaning of these signs: a map of the starry sky, a calendar, a hierarchy of spirits, or an encrypted history of the creation of the world. One thing is clear: we are facing a product of the highest culture and abstract thinking. However, the real shock awaited the scientific world much later, in our days, when technology allowed us to look deep into matter. The advent of accelerator mass spectrometry made precise dating of the artifact possible. Several independent examinations conducted by leading laboratories in Germany and Russia gave the same practically incredible result. The age of the Big Shigir Idol is between 11 and 12,000 years. This figure does not just surprise, it shocks and requires a complete revision of history textbooks. To realize the grandeur of this discovery, a simple comparison is enough. The Great Pyramids of Egypt on the Giza Plateau, traditionally considered the symbol of ancient monumental architecture, were erected about 4,500 years ago. The Shigir idol is more than twice as old. When the ancient Egyptians were just beginning to settle the Nile Valley, this wooden giant was already standing in the middle of the Urals as an ancient shrine, counting thousands of years of history. It is older than legendary Sumer, older than Babylon. It was created long before the flowering of the civilizations of Greece and Rome. It appeared when, according to the official version, scattered tribes of primitive hunters who barely knew how to process stone were roaming Europe. The presence of such an artifact completely destroys the myth of the wild and uninhabited Siberia of the past. This is a tangible object that you can see with your own eyes in a museum, and its age is a strict scientific fact, not a hypothesis. This fact leads us to an undeniable conclusion. At least 11,000 years ago, a highly developed civilization was already flourishing in the territory of the Urals. The people of this culture possessed filigree wood processing techniques, had a complex worldview, and, most importantly, had a developed system of symbolic communication, in essence, proto-writing. They left us their message, encrypted in faces and zigzags, but we, their civilized descendants, have turned out to be unable to decipher this code. This is direct proof that the concept of human development ex oriente lux, light from the east, asserting that all culture originated in Mesopotamia, is fundamentally incorrect. The history of humanity is much deeper, more complex, and possibly has completely different geographical centers of origin. So we now have in our hands all the links of a single chain that cannot be ignored. We see incredible megalithic structures whose geometry contradicts the laws of erosion. We find traces of high chemical technologies in the form of ancient polymers that were tens of thousands of years ahead of their time. We hear echoes of memory in legends about wise giant builders. And finally, we have a material, dated artifact that leaves no stone unturned in the usual chronology. There is no longer any doubt. We are standing on the ruins of a great and ancient civilization that was the cradle of humanity. But the realization of this fact only more sharply poses the main, most tragic and frightening question before us. If this civilization was so powerful, so wise, possessed such knowledge and technology, where did they all disappear to? Why was their history cut short so suddenly, leaving behind only silent ruins? The assembled facts, from the incredible geometry of the megaliths to the chemical traces of high technology and the ancient wooden idols, paint before us a picture of a once great civilization whose power and knowledge of the world stun the imagination. However, their sudden and total disappearance leaves a gaping void in history that cannot be filled by standard explanations of migration or epidemics. Historical experience teaches us that civilizations, as a rule, do not vanish without a trace overnight. They fade over centuries, go through stages of decadence, are assimilated by conquerors, or pass their achievements on to cultural heirs. But in the case of the ancient Urals, we observe a completely different picture. A sharp break, a finale that came instantly, as if a giant hand erased a whole world from the face of the earth with one ruthless movement. The answer to this grim riddle comes to us again from the depths of folk memory, from the same ancient tales that spoke of giants. A chilling narrative of a global catastrophe, an event that divided time into before and after, runs like a red thread through these legends. The legends of many peoples inhabiting Siberia and the Urals speak of heavenly fire and the subsequent Great Flood that destroyed all life. However, judging by the descriptions, this was not the gradual and smooth rise in sea levels that geologists talk about in the context of melting glaciers. The legends describe a cataclysm of a completely different scale, and, more importantly, a different physical nature. An instant, all-destroying event caused by external, cosmic forces. Modern researchers reconstructing the events of that era lean towards the version of the fall of a large celestial body, or a series of meteorite attacks that could have triggered a shift in the Earth's axis, and, as a consequence, a giant inertial wave. Imagine a wall of water several kilometers high rolling across continents at supersonic speed, sweeping away everything in its path. Such an impact explains why majestic cities were not just destroyed, but literally ground to dust. The shockwave and tsunami carried billions of tons of soil, silt, sand, and stones. It was this colossal mass of sedimentary rocks that buried the ruins, preserving them for thousands of years. What we accept today as hills and forest-covered mounds may actually be ancient buildings hidden under a multi-meter layer of deposits. Such an event put an end to a flourishing era in an instant. Only a few could survive in such a hell. Those who, by a lucky chance, were high in the mountains or in deep caves at the moment of impact. But these survivors lost everything: infrastructure, tools, energy sources, and accumulated knowledge bases. The highly developed civilization was violently thrown back into the Stone Age. Engineers, astronomers, and chemists perished, and their descendants had to fight for a piece of bread and warmth by a fire. The most complex technologies turned into useless junk, and memories of past greatness transformed into myths about gods flying in fiery chariots and a golden age lost due to the wrath of the heavens. It was this planetary-scale catastrophe that turned the once blooming, densely populated lands into the very devastated land that Arab geographers mapped with bewilderment millennia later. Medieval travelers saw only the consequences of the ancient tragedy: vast, deserted expanses overgrown with impassable wild forests, and rare scattered tribes dragging out a modest existence on the ruins of Cyclopean foundations, the origin of which they could no longer explain. They recorded the result without understanding the causes, but the name devastated itself carried the memory that this emptiness was unnatural. Moreover, we find traces of this global tragedy not only in the Urals, which confirms the planetary nature of the disaster. Like mournful monuments to a perished world, similar destroyed megaliths are scattered all over the Earth. Recall the grandiose terrace of Baalbek in Lebanon, composed of 1,000-ton slabs that modern machinery cannot even budge. Who began this construction, and why? And why was it so abruptly interrupted, leaving finished blocks lying in the quarry? Recall the mysterious ruins of the underwater city of Yonaguni off the coast of Japan, or the megalithic complexes found off the coast of Cuba at great depths, where streets and pyramids are clearly visible. Recall the underwater structures of Fuxian Lake in China. All these objects share a single signature. They were created by a civilization with a unified engineering standard and the highest level of technology, and were instantly destroyed and buried, either under a column of water or under layers of clay and sedimentary rocks. These are links in one chain, proof that the catastrophe redrew not only the map of the Urals, but the face of the entire planet, interrupting the development of humanity on the rise. Thus, the hypothesis of a global cataclysm gives a logical, albeit frightening, explanation for why a powerful culture disappeared physically, leaving us only debris and legends. Nature took its toll, hiding the traces of the tragedy under the green cover of the taiga. But this explanation concerns only the past. It gives absolutely no answer to another, perhaps even stranger and more outrageous fact of modern times. Why today, in an age of information abundance, satellite scanning, and breakthrough scientific discoveries, do we continue to live as if these finds do not exist? Why does history, which literally lies under our feet and is confirmed by laboratory analyses, remain a secret behind 7 seals, known only to a narrow circle of enthusiasts, while official science maintains a deathly silence? The global cataclysm provides a frighteningly logical and exhaustive explanation for the physical disappearance of the ancient civilization, turning its majestic cities into dust and vague legends. However, the elements, no matter how destructive, are powerless to explain another, no less strange and disturbing phenomenon of modern times: the conspiracy of silence that shrouds these findings in a thick veil today. We live in the information era, where any archaeological sensation, however minor, instantly flies around the globe. We are used to hearing about every new hieroglyph found in the tomb of an Egyptian pharaoh, about every shard discovered at an ancient human site in Africa, about every stone of Stonehenge, whose purpose has been debated by the world's leading minds for centuries. Mass media, streaming platforms, and authoritative scientific journals dedicate thousands of articles and documentaries to this, shaping our understanding of the past. But ask yourself a simple question. Who among the general public has heard of the 30,000-year-old polymer resin of the Urals, the chemical composition of which modern laboratories cannot reproduce? Who has seen in prime time on Central Television a detailed story about the megalithic walls and pyramids of Siberia, which, in their scale, are not inferior to, and sometimes surpass, the celebrated wonders of the world? Why does the Big Shigir idol, which has been laboratory proven to be twice as old as the Pyramid of Cheops, and is the oldest known monumental wooden artifact of humanity, not stand in the public consciousness alongside the most famous treasures of the Louvre or the Cairo Museum? Instead of heated discussions and scientific conferences, we observe a deafening, ringing silence from official academic science. Facts that cannot be denied are either stubbornly ignored or given hasty and unconvincing explanations in the spirit of a whimsical game of nature and natural weathering. Those discoveries that absolutely cannot be written off as geology are simply hushed up, settling in small circulation regional collections absolutely inaccessible to the common person. Rhetorical but no less acute questions involuntarily arise. Why is this happening? Is it really easier and more convenient for modern science to stick to the old, long-written and approved picture of the world, where all great civilizations originated somewhere far away in the Middle East or the Mediterranean, and the northern latitudes always remained the periphery of history? The answer likely lies in the inconvenient truth that the recognition of the Ural civilization carries. If it is officially confirmed that a highly developed culture existed in the territory of the Urals and Siberia tens of thousands of years ago, possessing technologies unavailable to us today, this will trigger a domino effect that will bring down the entire building of modern historical science. It will require rewriting thousands of textbooks, revising hundreds of doctoral dissertations, and canceling established doctrines and theories on which entire scientific careers and the reputations of respected institutions are built. To admit this means to sign off on one's own incompetence and admit that the chronology of human development taught to us in schools and universities is fundamentally flawed. Perhaps there is something more behind this silence than just academic inertia. It may be profitable for someone to maintain the myth that these lands were wild, uninhabited, and historically empty until the late Middle Ages. It may be profitable for someone that we do not know about our great and mysterious past, about the legacy that literally lies beneath our feet, awaiting its hour. This knowledge is capable of changing the self-awareness of a people, forcing us to take a fresh look at our place in the world. But where official science, bound by grants and dogmas, is silent, the stones begin to speak. And their language is understood by enthusiasts. Independent researchers, practical geologists, travelers, and ordinary local residents who have kept ancient traditions for generations. It is thanks to such indifferent people, thanks to those who are not afraid to ask questions and go against the current, that the veil of secrecy is beginning to lift little by little. We spend years studying the history of South America, admiring Inca masonry, traveling to China or Europe to touch antiquity. but we know tragically little about the land that is our home. We seek answers to the greatest mysteries of humanity in distant countries, not even suspecting that the main one is right here, nearby. We are literally walking on shards of a great proto-civilization, on the ruins of cities and sanctuaries hidden under a thin layer of sod, moss, and human oblivion. This is our main treasure, which does not need to be sought in distant lands. This is a whole page of our genuine, rewritten, and forgotten history that was stolen from us. The true chronicle of the Urals and Siberia is only just beginning to open to us, and its pages are being written not in the silence of offices, but here, on hikes through the wild taiga, on the peaks of ancient mountains, and on the shores of sacred lakes. And each of us can become a co-author of this discovery. To do this, one does not need to be a professional archaeologist with a scientific degree. One needs only one thing: to stop being indifferent to one's land, to cast aside imposed stereotypes, and to start looking more closely beneath one's feet. The truth is not out there somewhere. It is here, and it is waiting for us to be ready to accept it.